If you want to get better with your finances, you first need to figure out where you stand. And these are the 5 numbers that I think you should track to make sure that you are going to meet your goals. And I'm going to start with what I think is probably the most controversial and probably also most hyped up number, and that is your credit score. And I know a lot of people track their credit score, and it's kind of fun to look at that number go up, but really, this number isn't all that important. The part about your credit score that's the most important is that this is the number that creditors use in order to give you loans and financing. But for military members, this is also tracked if you have a security clearance and things like that, but not maybe for the reason that you think. They're looking for debt problems and things like that. The other reason why having a good credit score is important is because if you want to buy a house later, or especially if you're moving duty stations and stuff like that, it can get really competitive to get an apartment to rent or a house to rent. And so having a good credit score can help out for you to be a more competitive renter or, tenant. But the thing about the credit score is it is comprised of many different numbers. And one of them I'm going to talk about in just a minute, which I think is a whole lot more important than the credit score itself. The next number that I want to talk about is your liquidity ratio. And that's really just a fancy term for your emergency funds. Your liquidity ratio is really just a measure of how many months you can go without getting a paycheck. And so this is basically taking all of your savings and then dividing that into how much you are spending each month or what your expenses are. So if you have $10,000 of savings and you spend $2,000 per month, well, then you have liquidity ratio of 5. And so you have 5 months that you can go without getting a paycheck. Now, that's pretty good, but obviously, expenses are different and things like that. I know that our income in the military does seem pretty stable, but government shutdowns happen and people do find themselves outside the military for various reasons. So this could be due to administrative separations or a medical separation. You just don't know exactly what's going to happen. So it's always good to be prepared for things to go wrong, because one thing that I found is the more prepared I have been for an emergency, the less emergencies that I have. So the more savings you have, it's really just an inconvenience. We pull money from here and we put it here, and then you're good to go. But the liquidity ratio is really just a number that gives a good idea of financial strength and resilience. The next number that I want to talk about, and this one is an important one, is your debt to income ratio. And this is the ratio of your debt payments to your income. So if you have $50,000 of debt payments and $100,000 of income, you have a debt to income ratio of 50%. Now, this is really important for a couple reasons. One, like I said, this does feed into your credit score and is a major portion of it, right behind your payment history, making sure that you make all your payments on time. But also, too, this gives you an idea of like how much of your income you can actually use toward your bills or lifestyle. If all of your money is going toward debt payments, you really have almost no wiggle room to actually use that money for stuff that you might actually want to do with it, like go on vacation or buy, more Legos. I don't know. But that's money that you can't use for anything else because, as I've talked about before, debt is definite. You are contractually obligated to pay that back. And so that is money that you essentially cannot use. So, past you has already committed that money. You've already spent that money in the past. And so now you has to pay for it. And so that means that you have less and less money that you have to use for today. And over time, that can become a real problem. Real quick, if you're getting value out of this content, make sure to subscribe so that way you can get notified whenever I put out more for enlisted, by enlisted personal finance content. All right, back to it. The next number I want to talk about is your net worth. And your net worth is basically just your total assets minus your total liabilities. So everything you own minus everything you owe. And then that gives you your net worth. And this is really important because you could be growing your assets, but also growing your debt and still end up with basically the same amount of wealth. And so, like, that's how you can end up on like basically a treadmill to where you're not really gaining anything. You're just doing a whole lot of work and it's not really building you wealth. Like, if you had to liquidate everything today, you would be left with nothing. So what we want is we want for our net worth to be in the positive. If you've never ran the numbers on your net worth, you might be surprised. I know I was. I had a negative net worth whenever I first started paying attention to this. So what you want instead is to have a positive net worth, and then you want it to grow every single year. And as long as you're making positive forward progress with your net worth, that gives you a good kind of indicator that you're moving in the right direction. It's not a be all end all, and really your net worth or total wealth, it's not your personal worth. You are still a great person regardless of how much money you have. And for us enlisted folks, this might move a little bit slower than others. And that's one thing that I have definitely had to kind of bring myself back to earth on, and just understand that there's only so much wealth you can build with a certain level of income. And that's okay. My journey's different than many others, and yours will be too. But the main thing that I want to talk about with the net worth is just that you want it to increase over time and just keep moving that needle forward. The last number that I want to talk about, and this is the most important number in my opinion, is your savings rate. Your savings rate is one of those things that you can control no matter what. You can always control how much money you are saving versus how much money you're spending. And then the other thing about the savings rate is that it is one of those that if you have a high savings rate, you can afford to make a few mistakes and it not completely wipe you out. If you have a low savings rate and a high debt to income ratio and no liquidity ratio, then if something bad happens, you are in a bad spot and you really have no wiggle room. You have no way to really get yourself out of it other than getting outside help. And that's not really a fun place to be. I've been there. I know. I will never forget walking down to the apartment complex office and asking if I could pay rent with a credit card. It didn't feel good, and I still remember it to this day. On the other hand, once we got everything together, years later, we bought a $20,000 car by swiping a debit card, and that felt a whole lot different and a whole lot better. But I only got there because we were intentional about paying attention to our finances, tracking these numbers, and moving forward. The other thing you might be wondering is, how do I track all this? And it can seem really, really complicated, but it's really not. But there's plenty of tools that you can use out there. Now, a lot of people use budgeting apps like You Need a Budget or Monarch. I personally don't like using an app. I've tried several of them out and they're okay, but I just don't like tracking money all the time. I know that sounds weird from a guy that's talking about money, but I just really don't like paying attention to it all that much. I like a more set it and forget it kind of setup. And so what I do is I actually have everything lined out on a spreadsheet. I have our budget, all that, all of our goals, everything's all set in a spreadsheet. So I know exactly how much money needs to go where, and then I automate everything. So the only thing I need to do is look in my checking account, know how much I can spend, and then just roll with it. And for like personal, like play money, stuff like that, I have a separate account that goes into. If I look in that account and there's no money, I don't spend anything. I just don't do it. So it makes it really simple for me, and that's how I prefer to do it. Now, if you want a copy of my actual spreadsheet that I use, I actually have that all smooshed in together in what I have now called the mother of all financial spreadsheets. But really it is all the spreadsheets that I personally use prettied up and pushed into one spreadsheet so you can actually use all of that there. You can use as much of or as little of it as you want. Now, the other thing that you can do, you have access, if you're in the military, you have access to a personal financial counselor on post. You can get with them. They have budget templates, they have trackers, like there's all kinds of things that you can use through them. And then For things like the credit score and things like that, don't pay for that. It's really not necessary and it's really not that important. So I would not pay to get your credit score. If you really need to know or really want to know your credit score, your personal financial counselor on post can pull that for you. Or oftentimes, most banks, I know I have at least a couple different banks that they offer that for free. And so I just get that and I get the little alert that says, hey, this month your credit score is increased or decreased or whatnot. But it's not something I would obsess over at all. I would pay attention much more to your debt to income ratio, your savings rate, your net worth, and track those things much more than your credit score, because those things will actually help you improve your credit score anyway. To wrap things up, the 5 numbers that you need to track are the savings rate, your net worth, your debt to income ratio, your liquidity or emergency savings ratio, and your credit score. And if you pay attention to all those and you track them on a regular basis, I would say not more than, once a month, once a quarter, or once you get into the habit of this, once a year. But as long as you track all those and you continue to improve those, you will be amazed at how much progress you'll make in a short amount of time. At least that's been my experience, and that's been the experience of a lot of other people that I've talked to and worked with. So if you have any questions about these specifically, or you would like me to make a video to talk more in depth about any of these videos, make sure that you put it in the comments and let me know what you would like to hear more about. And before you go, make sure to subscribe or check out one of my other videos that will be even more helpful to you in the future.